Most embarrassing deaths in ancient history. Draco and the deadly applause. Long before laws were written down anywhere else in the ancient world, Athens had a guy named Draco, and, to be honest, the man had some serious anger issues when it came to punishment. Draco, who around 621 BC was the first to write Athenian law into a real legal code, came up with the death penalty as a solution to pretty much every crime, from murder to stealing a cabbage. Steal an apple, lose your head. This is actually where we get the word draconian, meaning excessively harsh, and Draco earned that reputation the hard way. You'd think a guy this obsessed with punishing others would have some sort of legendary dramatic death to suit his legacy. Rather, the death of Draco is one of the most humiliating ways a lawmaker has ever perished. According to the ancient accounts, Draco went to the island of Aegina. The people there were so attached to him that they resolved to reward him with their gratitude, not in coins, not in medals, but in their cloaks and hats, thrown at him one by one, in a crowded theater, in honor and affection. The problem is that apparently ancient Greek audiences didn't know when to stop throwing clothes at a man. Cloaks kept falling down on Draco from all directions, piling up in deeper and deeper piles on top of him, until the poor guy was completely buried under a mountain of fabric. By the time anyone realized what was going on, Draco had suffocated in his seat, smothered to death by his own fan club. The toughest legislator in ancient history didn't die in battle, nor was he poisoned by a rival. He was killed with kindness, one cloak at a time, literally. The philosopher who choked on his own logic. Chrysippus was one of the most revered philosophers in ancient Greece, a leading voice of the Stoic school of thought that taught people to be calm, rational, and detached from the chaos of life. So, it is fitting that his death is one of the most ridiculous exits in ancient history because it wasn't chaos or calm, but a donkey and some very strong wine. Ancient reports say that one afternoon Chrysippus saw a donkey eating figs, and for some reason he found the spectacle hilarious. Perhaps it was the way the donkey was awkwardly chomping through the fruit. Perhaps it was just a strange moment of lucidity, but the philosopher decided this was the funniest thing he had ever seen. He wanted to take his time, so he called out for a servant to bring him some wine to wash down the figs he was also munching on as he watched the donkey do its thing, according to reports. The problem is that Chrysippus apparently found the donkey so outrageously funny that he couldn't stop himself from laughing. And the more he laughed, the more difficult it was to actually swallow anything. Apparently the wine and the figs, and the philosopher's own uncontrolled laughter caused him to choke to death right there on the spot. Undone by the very sort of irrational, chaotic moment his whole philosophy was designed to avoid. A guy who spent his life teaching others to master their emotions finally got beaten by a donkey and his own laughter, which, to be honest, might be the most stoic irony there is. The king who died laughing. King Martin I of Aragon ruled in the early 1400s, and by all accounts he wasn't exactly cut out for the throne. History portrays him as an overweight, sickly king whose health was poor for most of his later reign. In fact, his cause of death almost seems too fitting, for it was not war, nor assassination, but apparently a really, really good joke. Legend has it that King Martin had just eaten a huge meal, said to be a whole goose, when his favorite court jester came wandering in. The jester, seeing his chance, said something or other. The punchline has not quite been preserved for us by history. Whatever it was, it hit different, as the king could not stop laughing reportedly. With his weakened health and stuffed stomach, that laughter turned into something much more dangerous than a chuckle. A heavy meal, pre-existing health issues, and an uncontrollable laughing fit were said to have triggered a fatal reaction, and King Martin I died shortly after. He earned the unfortunate nickname Martin the Humane in some records, but history remembers him more for how he died than how he ruled. Somewhere out there, a court jester told a joke so good it accidentally killed a king, and we never even get to know what he said. The playwright killed by a turtle. Aeschylus is often referred to as the father of Greek tragedy, a dramatist whose influence was so great that his work established the very foundation of the theater we know today. You'd think a guy so important to the arts would have some sort of dramatic, poetic death to go along with his legacy. Instead, Aeschylus allegedly died in one of the most bizarre and random ways possible, and the story involves a bird, a turtle, and some really bad luck with his own head. Ancient accounts say that Aeschylus had been given some kind of prophecy that he would die from something falling on him from above. Somewhat spooked, he apparently refused to be under roofs, and instead spent his time outside in the open, thinking he had outsmarted fate by removing all the ceilings that could possibly crush him. Unfortunately, fate had a much stranger plan in store, one that involved no buildings in any way. According to legend, an eagle flying overhead had captured a turtle and was looking for something solid on which to smash the turtle's shell so it could eat it. The eagle, apparently mistaking Aeschylus's bald head for a smooth, shiny rock high above, is said to have dropped the turtle right on him. Apparently, the impact killed the playwright instantly, so the man who spent his whole life avoiding rooftops to avoid a prophecy still died from something falling on his head, just a bird instead of a building. The emperor who drowned in wine. The Bohemian Emperor Wenceslaus, who was also Holy Roman Emperor in the late 1300s and early 1400s, was not exactly a model of discipline as a ruler. The historical record depicts him as one who preferred pleasure to responsibility. His reign is littered with tales of drunkenness, laziness, and a general lack of interest in actually governing his empire. Of course, a man who lived like that wasn't going to get a graceful, dignified exit. According to the accounts of his death, Wenceslaus had gone hunting, though by this point in his life, hunting seemed more to be an excuse to drink heavily outdoors than an actual sport. Many historians believe that the emperor suffered some sort of sudden physical collapse, thought to have been a stroke or similar medical emergency brought on by his lifestyle, after a long day of chasing very little and drinking quite a lot. What makes this death especially humiliating is not just the collapse itself, but the timing and circumstances of the collapse. His reputation for heavy drinking was well documented up to his final days, and many accounts and later tellings directly link his death to the habits that defined his rule, painting the picture of an emperor whose love of wine finally caught up with him in the least dignified way possible. A man who ruled two great realms came to be remembered not for his politics, but for drinking himself to an early grave. Attila, the Hun's wedding night disaster. For decades, Attila the Hun was one of the most feared men in the ancient world, conducting brutal campaigns across Europe, terrifying the Roman Empire so badly that his name alone was enough to make emperors negotiate. This was a man who had survived a lifetime of battles, betrayals, and political machinations. And of course, the thing that finally did him in was his own wedding night. Then, in 453 AD, Attila decided to marry again, this time to a woman called Ildiko. And the wedding feast was said to be a wild, drunken affair, the sort of thing you'd expect from a warlord who's finally let his hair down. Historical accounts have it that Attila drank heavily all night, celebrating his new marriage with the same intensity he brought to conquering half of Europe. The next morning, Attila was found dead in his bed, and his new bride was reported to have been found alive, but terrified beside his body. Most historians agree that Attila suffered a massive nosebleed while very drunk, and because he was flat on his back in a drunken stupor, he could not wake up or turn his head, and basically choked on his own blood in his sleep. The man who had conquered whole regions and made empires tremble was finally defeated by his own nose, some wine, and terrible sleeping posture on what was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of his life. The emperor who yelled himself to death. Valentinian I was a Roman emperor of the 4th century. He was notorious for having an absolutely explosive temper. He is historically described as a truly competent military commander and administrator, but also as a man who could not control his anger and would often fly into violent rages over the most minor provocations. That short fuse finally got to him in the most on-brand way possible. In 375 AD, Valentinian was receiving envoys of a Germanic tribe called the Quadi, who had come to negotiate after a series of conflicts along the Roman frontier. During the meeting, it is said, the envoys tried to justify the actions of their tribe and pushed back against some of the emperor's accusations. Apparently, this did not sit well with Valentinian at all. Instead of keeping his cool during the negotiations, the emperor began yelling at the envoys, getting himself into a total rage right in front of everyone. History accounts say that Valentinian grew so full of rage in the midst of his shouting that he suffered what is believed to have been a stroke or burst blood vessel and suddenly dropped down in the middle of his tirade. He died almost immediately afterward, meaning that one of the most powerful men in Rome was ultimately undone not by an army of enemies or an assassin, but by his own inability to do something as simple as take a breath during a diplomatic engagement. The Pharaoh and the Sacred Crocodile. The first pharaoh of United Egypt is traditionally credited to Menes, the legendary figure who is said to have united Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom around 3100 BC. Being the man at the very beginning of one of history's greatest civilizations, you would expect his death to be recorded with the same grandeur as his legacy. But ancient historical accounts describe an ending that is almost comically undignified for the founder of Egypt itself. The ancient historian Manetho's accounts tell us that Menes reigned for decades. Once he had finally established his kingdom and settled in for a long and stable reign, he reportedly grew a little too comfortable in his old age. The story goes that Menes had gotten into the habit of doing dangerous recreational activities. One of the more popular theories is that he had started hunting, specifically involving the Nile River, which was home to some of the most dangerous predators in the region. The most repeated story is that Menes was eventually killed on one of these river excursions by a hippopotamus, an animal that the ancient Egyptians actually feared far more than crocodiles because of its raw aggression and unpredictable temper. The first pharaoh, the man who is said to have founded Egyptian civilization as we know it, was reportedly killed not by a rival king or a palace conspiracy, but by an angry river animal while he was out looking for a little excitement in his retirement years. So yeah, ancient history had as many ridiculous deaths as royal history did, maybe even more. Let me know in the comments if you want a part 2 with even more ridiculous ancient deaths. Make sure to like this video and subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in the next one.